Welcome to Globe Watch with me, Charles Ebune. Delegates attending the 22nd United Nations Framework Conference on Climate Change have begun arriving the Moroccan city of Marrakech for what so many have simply qualified as the Climate Change Summit of Implementation. It comes after the Worldwide Climate Summit of 2015 in Paris, France, in which global leaders agreed to reduce emissions, and the one in Kigali few months ago to stabilize the use of chlorofluorocarbons. So, what is the state of the global environment on the eve of negotiations to start about COP22? My guest today comes from one of the world's leading environmental campaign groups, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF. Hansen G40, welcome to Globe Watch.
Thank you, Mr. Ebune.
What does the year 2020 imply to an organization like WWF?
A very exciting year in that all the countries, you remember everybody who signed the Paris Accord, including Cameroon, agreed that the $100 billion that it was going to be put to fight climate change was going to be fully operational.
And I understand equally that the WWF Planet Report for this year was just published, and that part of that year, 2020, may be hearing extinction for some species. What are the key findings of that report?
The key findings, just as a small background, our Living Planet report is published every 2 years. And it's a report that tries to see, to summarize how the world is faring, how the whole globe is doing. It's like you went to a doctor and it examined you to see how good you are and how your body is doing and what are the things that are not going well. So this report is trying to, in this report, WWF works with a scientific organization. You probably know that WWF is a scientific organization. We are not talking talk. Works with scientific organization, universities, London Zoological Society, to come up with figures of how the planet is doing. You know, and there's a lot is happening.
So what are the key figures that we should know about the Living Planet report?
Yes, the key thing is that doing business as usual, we will have a decline of about 67% of the vertebrate population of in the world, which is a big impact. It's like instead of the world has nature has a capacity to regenerate when you use it. But the way we are using it is such that we are overusing. It's like you're earning 100,000 and spending 150. It means you're spending more than you're earning. You will then be in debt. We are using nature more than nature can replenish itself. So we are drawing attention to the fact that we cannot do business as usual. We cannot just go ahead with what we think we are doing.
Biodiversity is a key component of what we are talking here. When you say that we cannot do business as usual, just how terrible is the destruction of the vertebrate world as from 1970s to about 67% you are talking?
Yes.
How just how dangerous is that to human existence and the stability of the global ecosystem?
Good. You probably know, some people talk, if you remember, the Pope, even the religion is coming into it. The Pope recently called attention of people to make sure that we fight against climate change. The issue is that when humanity misuse the world, the nature will react, and the reaction of nature has an impact, and the impact will be on human beings. You know, last year was one of the hottest, and we are foreseeing that this year may even be hotter. as it's increasingly going forward. Because of climate change, the rain patterns have changed. Most farmers don't know when to plant and when to harvest. It's a disaster because you don't have food. If you don't have food, we'll have hunger everywhere. And the impact on humanity can be very much. We have all the natural disasters that are coming, some of which are the reaction of nature to overuse by humans.
When you compare the 2015 Living Planet report and the one of this year, where do you see the clear differences?
Well, the key thing I can say is that there is still, the humans are still using the world as is. You know, you remember key polluters like the US and China were against taking the declaration on climate change, taking action on climate change. But recently, which is what the Paris Declaration was good, recently those two key polluters accepted. And why did they accept? Because the impact is on US and China. I hope you go to China sometimes and see people moving, covering their nose with because they cannot breathe.
When I listen to you, I understand that the stakes are very high for environmental campaign groups that will be meeting in Marrakech up to November 18 for a new framework of engagements. What will be the key position of the Worldwide Fund for Nature?
Well, we still push for people. You know, there was Paris Declaration, but the declaration is not implementation. We are pushing for everything from the Paris Declaration to be implemented. Also, the the Sustainable Development Goal should be accepted and implemented by the countries. This is the way, if you read the Living Planet report, we think this is a precursor solution to all the problems we are facing. But the only solution will come if people implement what they engage in during the
So what kind of policy framework should attendees in Morocco, for example, attending COP22, be securing to make sure that implementation is smooth? As you and I talk, not every country has endorsed or passed national legislation to give a national backing to COP21 agreement in Paris.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, everything is to do a lot of lobbying, and that's one of the areas in which we are strong in. You probably know that we're in more than 100 countries, so we do a lot of lobbying at country level to make sure that the governments accept and sign and pass this declaration into law. Passing it again into law is one thing, as I said earlier, but implementing all the recommendations is what is key.
What kind of implementation should we have from policy-making institutions to make sure that what was agreed in Kigali about chlorofluorocarbons, which have to do with refrigerators because they have been used too much worldwide? You just give the case of China, where the breathing space is very limited for the moment now in areas like Beijing, Guangzhou, and Sichuan. What should governments be doing in particular? Because if you realize what some countries for the Kigali Agreement will start implementing by 2029. Is that too late? Are you part of that group?
Nothing is too late. We have to start doing something. And one of the things we are fighting for, if I take the case of Cameroon, is working with the ministries to make sure that we push the government, we lobby the government to understand how to go about it. There's one thing signing an accord, and there's something implementing what is meant to be the accord. You know, some people have the impression that if you have to preserve nature or to conserve nature, you're against development. On the contrary, if you develop without taking care of nature, it will destroy your development. You can construct a dam and it will be broken tomorrow. It will be, siltation will fill the dam. So there are things to do. And we are trying to accompany the government, and which is why we have signed MOUs with most key ministries, including the Ministry of Environment, to accompany the government in some of the areas, technically and sometimes financially.
Why do you think that when we were going to Paris, there was too much talk of COP21 as if we had that, we will no longer have environmental problems, but whereas we are going for COP22? Can you explain to me from an environmental perspective or environmental diplomacy why there was too much media attention for COP22, for COP21 and not for COP22?
Well, that's the key.
The threat is over?
No, it's just the beginning. The key countries, and that was one of the reasons for the so much media campaign, was to make sure that China and US come in. Everybody is feeling the impact of climate change. I mean everybody, including even my old mothers in the village. The issue was to get these countries to accept at least that they could implement something to mitigate climate change. Let me not use big words, to reduce climate change. And we finally got it. COP22, the main key thing will be implementation, as I said earlier.
Okay, finally, how does WWF, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, describe the state of the world environmentally on the eve of COP22 negotiations?
It's bad. We shouldn't be pushing the world, we shouldn't be pushing nature too much. It's really too much because the impact will be too negative on the human being.
Dr. Hansen G40 from the Worldwide Fund for Nature, thank you very much indeed for being guest on Globe Watch.
Thank you. You're welcome, and you're welcome to come to me anytime you have questions.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, next Tuesday, Americans, over 241 million people, will be choosing their new president. Latest polls indicate that the Democratic presidential hopeful, Hillary Clinton, may be elected. So, as we come to the close of U.S. elections 2016, in which we have had one of the most nasty presidential elections period, in which senatorial and House of Representatives seats are equally to be disputed next November 8th. Let's remind ourselves with the U.S. electoral process a day before we know the next occupant of the White House.
That's why I can say with confidence, there has never been a man or a woman, not me, not Bill, nobody, more qualified than Hillary Clinton to serve as President of the United States of America.
The United States election season is one of the longest in the world.
2 years prior to the election, they began the campaign season, the primaries. Actually, before the primaries, candidates will go out and let their names be known. They throw hints that they're interested in running for office. They travel throughout the different states, South, Midwest, West, the East, and the like. And when the primary season takes place, you have up to 12 candidates or more for one party running, and then one of them will be selected as the nominee of that party by superdelegates, by voters directly voting in the primaries. They are named the candidate or the nominee, and the Democratic or the Republican National Convention, or for the other parties as well, and then their names appear on the ballots. So on election day, the American people decide who finally will be the next president of the United States.
Let me just tell you, before we go any further, in Chicago, which has the toughest gun laws in the United States, probably you could say by far, they have more gun violence than any other city.
Through party meetings in the name of caucuses, primaries, at all levels of the electoral chain, the populace gets enough time to make the right choices.
You have the caucuses of individuals and the parties getting together. You have the primaries of voters out there directly getting together. You have the superdelegates getting together and then voting for nominees. But at the end of the day, at the heart of it all is the American people. The American people decide in numbers, by their votes, who should be their nominee. And that reflects what the Founding Fathers wanted in our Constitution, which was, again, the government by the consented, meaning the people consent to that. Somebody once said, what makes the American Constitution different is that it is not one where the government tells the people what to do, but rather the people establish for the government how it should govern.
With a population of over 300 million people, some 241 are eligible voters in a country where early voting is a key feature.
First of all, I'd like to mention one very key thing. There's something called the Hatch Act. It's a law. And it's something important to explain to the Cameroonian public so they know how our system works. Our system does not permit by law for ambassadors or for any employee of the federal branch, of the executive branch of the federal government to attempt to influence elections in any way or to express their political opinions in any way. And what does that mean? It means that you can have a private vote, but because you're an employee of the executive branch, you should stay away from any political activities. Notice how it is very important. The president, the vice president, and a couple of others are exempted from that law. Obviously, they're politicians. By tradition, the Secretary of State, himself or herself, does not engage in any political campaigning, and again, under the spirit of that law.
The United States Electoral Code is unique, with the Electoral College principle being the key determinant, backed by popular vote, with the magic 270 Electoral College votes needed to be the President of the United States.
Popular vote does count because the popular vote in each state will determine the winner-take-all rule. What does that mean? If Texas has 25 Electoral College votes, I'm not sure the exact number, as an example, right? And the majority of a certain party voted for one candidate, then that means that all of the Electoral College votes of that state will go to that candidate. Now,
So it's a winner-take-all system.
Winner-take-all system. But I'm going to tell you something that's pretty interesting historically. The popular vote, there are circumstances, there have been times like in the year 2000 when Vice President Al Gore won the popular vote, but he lost the Electoral College vote. And why? Why was that? Because there were states that had more Electoral College votes than others, like Florida, that determined the election. So when Al Gore lost the popular vote in the state of Florida, the Electoral College vote of that state went to George W. Bush. That put him over the top for the required 270 Electoral College votes to win the White House, and then he won. So one time in history, as an example, where the loser of the popular vote actually won the Electoral College vote and thus ascended to the White House.
The failure to get that number calls for a special session of the Senate to choose for a president, as it was the case with Thomas Jefferson in 1800.
The American system is not perfect. The Cameroonian system is not perfect, but we try to perfect it along the way. Mm-hmm. And what our founding fathers did was ensure that if there was an Electoral College tie, then the election will be sent to the House of Representatives in the Congress, the lower house of the Congress. And then they would vote, one vote per person state for the next president of the United States. And the Senate would vote for the vice president. So again, that is a circumstance that is safeguarding the insurance that our system will continue properly. And at the end of the day, American democracy is about the American people.
One of the fascinating elements of the American election space is cash, known as the most money-consuming electoral system on earth.
And donate what they want, up to $1,000 normally per candidate. It depends. There's other fundraiser methods that they use. There's different blocks. I mean, John and Mary from Iowa will write a check to their candidate. Then you have organizations, in Hollywood or New York or Texas or Colorado, different interest groups, for farmers or health or security, women's rights, whatever it may be. They'll come together, they donate money, and that is how they support a candidate. So traditionally, candidates must raise a certain amount of money to be able to be nominees for their parties and, of course, to win the presidency of the United States.
The modern political culture has also meant predicting the winner before time, a job done by pollsters. And if you have a dirty past, American journalists will deal with you.
The media is a watchdog of American democracy. The media has, in fact, the president, the Secretary of State, the vice president, any government official must travel with the White House press corps or the State Department press corps. Even when the president of the United States goes on vacation, the media is there, camping outside, because they monitor how government is performing. Is the government serving the people properly? Are the taxpayers' dollars being wisely used? The media will actually scrutinize the candidates and what they said, what they think they said. They will look at the platforms, they will look at the history of their public pronouncements 10 years before on a given policy, on healthcare or whatnot, or security issues. So the media is a very vibrant part of the American democratic system, and it is essential. The media, of course, has evolved over the years, and right now we have the citizen journalist, and now we have social media. So it's a new component into it as well.
This Tuesday, Americans will be choosing their 45th president to continue with the tenets of the founding fathers embodied in their Constitution and works like the Federalist Papers.
The American electoral process is a celebration in democracy. And what do we mean by that? Winston Churchill once said that democracy is the worst form of government except all other forms of government. When the founding fathers founded the nation, they intended for the American people, not the government, but the American people to rule. The consent of the governed principle. And so we change presidents all the time.
Like elsewhere around the world, elections revolve around issues, places, and more particularly about people. And the United States squares in on these two. This information just coming in, our President Barack Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama, and former U.S. President Bill Clinton will join Hillary Clinton this Monday in a joint special final campaign rally to end the Democratic campaign for the White House U.S. elections 2016. And just to remind our audience that at least 30 million Americans have already voted in the early voting system of U.S. elections. And whosoever wins would simply mean that on November 9, which is a Wednesday, the world will know the new occupant of the White House to replace President Barack Obama. And probably this historical news, which of course is probably not good news for Hillary Clinton, since the turn of the 20th century, no Democrat has replaced another Democrat successfully through the ballot box consecutively at the White House. By implication, Hillary Clinton may not win the elections, as everybody is predicting based on that historical perspective. Well, the American people will decide on November 8th. And this is the Cameroon Radio Television. On this channel, undisputable information is a priority.